which driver so far has fared best in qualifying? Hello, my name is Alex Does F1 Stuff and welcome back to another random F1 episode, and today we are going to be doing something that I sort of did a couple of months ago. So as we have reached the halfway point in the season, I'm going to take a look and break down each driver's qualifying performances and compare them against his teammate. And rather than just simply looking at the qualifying balances, as in is it 8-2, is it 5-5 at the moment, we are going to be looking at the gaps as well, and the average gaps over the 10 races that have happened so far. So to give you an idea of what I mean by this, we will start with Mercedes and we will pull up the graph for their qualifying performances for the first 10 races. Lewis Hamilton is on the right hand side, being the normal sort of Mercedes turquoise, with Valtteri Bottas being the sort of murky green colour. Ignore the fact that it says minus 0.063, it's the only way I could get the bars on the left hand side, just forget that minus exists, and it is a 6,000th advantage to Valtteri Bottas. And in terms of the qualifying battle so far, it is 8-2 towards Lewis Hamilton, with an average advantage of just under 0.4 of a second, courtesy of his mega stereo pole position lap, compared to Valtteri Bottas's advantage of just almost 0.004 of a second. Now the next graphic that's going to be popping up is sort of a visualization of how, I want to say the word biased, but I don't think that's correct. It's sort of how much this gap is preferred to one driver. We will be pulling up the cars. I worked long and hard to make a car design. I'm not the best at art, but we have a 91.2% advantage to Lewis Hamilton in qualifying compared to just an 8.8% advantage for Valtteri Bottas. So what we expect to see with this visualization is simply how close the teammates are. For example, being a 90-10 split, it is fairly one-sided that one driver is more dominant than the other. Whereas if it was an exact 50-50 split, or as close to 50-50 as we could possibly get, then the two drivers are fairly even throughout qualifying. So with the general layout of the video outlined, let's move on into the second team today, which is Red Bull. We will be going in championship order so far, and Red Bull is, well, one-sided, shall we say. Max Verstappen is the only colour on the board. It is currently 10-0, with an average advantage of 0.660 seconds and no average advantage in front for Alex Albon. And in terms of the percentages for this, it's fairly obvious: 100% to Max Verstappen and 0% to Alex Albon. And up next we have McLaren, with Lando Norris on the right and Carlos Sainz on the left. You will notice though that Tuscany is missing, that I haven't given a value to this race. If we just pull up the leaderboard so far, or the qualifying battles, the head-to-head, it is 7-3 to Carlos. The reason I haven't included Tuscany is that it was actually Carlos who outqualified Norris. However, it was Norris's Q2 time that was faster than Carlos's Q3 time. And in that case, I felt it would be a little bit of an injustice to include it in the averages. So with that out of the way, the averages were 0.278 towards Lando Norris and 0.166 towards Carlos Sainz. And in terms of the percentage values, if you want to call them the percentage values, I'm not sure how I'm going to phrase this, 37.3% to Carlos Sainz, and it's the opposite, it is 62.7% to Lando Norris. Honestly, it's kind of a strange little statistic. It's a nice visual, it's just a strange statistic that I'm doing, seeing how even they are against each other. But anyway, with McLaren out of the way, we will move on to Racing Point, the Pink Panthers. And of course you will notice the Britain and the 70th anniversary Grand Prix are not included, simply because Sergio Perez on the right hand side was not present at the Grand Prix. And this qualifying advantage was 6-2 over the 8 races that they have been paired together, with an average advantage of just under 0.3 for Sergio Perez and just over a second for Lance Stroll. I was about to say Lando Norris, but that's wrong. Now, I felt in Styria it would be harsh to exclude it as an outlier value, which I could have easily done, and then we'd have only had 0.168 and the two would be similar to the McLaren pair. But I felt that it did need to be included, as it was just tipping it down with rain. There was no changing conditions in Styria, it was all constant rain, and that is down to the driver, as we saw with Lewis Hamilton miles in front of Valtteri Bottas. So the 1.963 is going to stay, and that is his average overall. And if we pull up the percentages for this, it is then a little bit more one-sided towards Lance Stroll, 78.4% to just 22.6% for Sergio Perez. If you feel differently about that, yeah, tough. You can always work it out yourself by taking out the 1.963. I'm going to include it as it was not a drying session, or it was not a wetting session. It was wet throughout, and I feel it is a representative take on their performances in the rain. But anyway, with Racing Point all done and dusted, we move to Renault with Daniel Ricciardo on the right and Esteban Ocon on the left. Again, Tuscany is missing, and this was Daniel Ricciardo that outperformed Ocon in this race, as Ocon crashed in Q3, so there was no time to take from him, and it is 9-1 to Daniel Ricciardo, with a 0.342 tenth advantage on average for Ricciardo and a 0.27 tenth advantage for Ocon. And in terms of the qualifying head-to-head, this is the closest 50-50 that we have so far, 44.2% to Ocon and a 55.8% to Daniel Ricciardo. And then moving to team number 6, we have Ferrari, Charles Leclerc on the right and Sebastian Vettel on the left. Fairly straightforward, 8-2, similar to the Mercedes pair as well, with just under half a second advantage of Esteban Ocon for Charles Leclerc, and then a 6,000th advantage when in front for Sebastian Vettel. And in terms of their average advantages, this is again very, very one-sided. 11% to Sebastian Vettel compared to a whopping 88% for Charles Leclerc. And moving to the latter half of the field, we have AlphaTauri up next with Pierre Gasly on the right and Danny Kvyat on the left. And once again we find ourselves with a missing Grand Prix, and that is Italy, a race in which it was Pierre Gasly that outqualified him 8-2 over the first 10 races, with Kvyat's Q2 time being just a couple thousandths faster than Pierre Gasly's Q3 time. And looking at the average advantage, we have just over half a second for Pierre Gasly and just under 1.5 tenths for Danny Kvyat. And in terms of the percentage head-to-head, we have again a very one-sided margin here, 24% towards Danny Kvyat and a whopping 76% towards Pierre Gasly. And I've just realised that I haven't actually animated fully the bar for Danny Kvyat going through his car. It's okay, not the end of the world. And heading into the bottom 3 teams, we have Alfa Romeo up next, Kimi Raikkonen on the right and Antonio Giovinazzi on the left. It is 5-5, it is all even at Alfa Romeo, with an average advantage of 0.525 tenths for Kimi Raikkonen and 2 tenths for Antonio Giovinazzi, with the percentage head-to-head being fairly one-sided once again, 29.3% to Giovinazzi, and it was 70% towards Raikkonen. And penultimately, we have Haas, with Romain Grosjean on the right and Kevin Magnussen on the left. Styria is excluded as Romain Grosjean actually crashed. Of course he did, it was raining, why wouldn't he crash? It is also 5-5 as Kevin Magnussen managed to outqualify him in Styria, with an average advantage of just over 4 tenths for Grosjean and just over 3 tenths for Magnussen. And again in the head-to-head, this is fairly 50-50, 44.5 to 55.5% as well. And then lastly, we have Williams. Again, fairly one-sided. This is another 10-0, similar to Red Bull, with a 0.795 average advantage for Russell and no average advantage for Latifi. And again, pulling up the percentage values, it is fairly obvious, 0% for Latifi and 100% for Russell. And so for those that are trying to keep track of each driver's average advantage in front of their teammate, no worries, I have my own separate graph for this. So we've got Stroll leading the way with being 1 second on average in front of his teammate. Then we've got Russell, Verstappen, Gasly and Raikkonen are very close together, just over half a second, with Leclerc just under half a second. Then we've got Grosjean, Hamilton, Magnussen, Perez, Norris, Kvyat, Giovinazzi, Sainz, and then Vettel and Bottas are near the end with just being a few thousandths ahead when they were in front of their teammate, with Albon and Latifi down in the bottom, with actually Latifi being classed as last as Russell was further in front of him than Verstappen was to Albon. And there we have it. There is the end of my video about each driver's qualifying performances against their teammate at the midway point of the season. I'll probably do another one of these at the end after all 17 races and see how it compares. I will also think about doing one that is very, very similar in like pro forma status, but looking at the race advantage instead. But that's all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next video with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.